What I said is, if you want to know how the war machine keeps Americans cheering for more war, here you go. Time magazine, they really knew how they do top-notch propaganda. That's what this is. Let's not forget that they also loved him. He was their person of the year, and of course, their most famous person of the year was Hitler. So
Saddam Hussein was a person of the year. I remember.
I wouldn't. Boy, and Zelensky's being a great sport about it. I'd say to tell you, Adolf Hitler, George W. Bush, and many other mass murderers had this time's honor. It won't change the fact that Ukraine is a sacrificial lamb in the U.S. proxy war, and the goal to unbalance Russia and deindustrialize Germany. Zelensky is the U.S. puppet, and this is U.S. propaganda. So let me bring you in right now. Do you agree with that? Is this proxy war? Now we know they're trying to put an economic hurt on Russia, but is it also to deindustrialize Germany?
Well, that's a side effect, a very welcome side effect in U.S. circles. What has happened is the German economy is going boom, and that is because they can't get enough oil and gas to run their big factories. Some of them are coming to the United States. Then when the Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged, and John Brennan from the CIA got up on MSNBC and said, it must be the Russians. Russians sabotaged their own pipeline. Well, that's how bad it gets. And what did the Germans do? The Germans who are going to freeze this winter and their economy is going to go, well, they said, well, turn the other cheek here. Let's do what else we can for the United States. So it's not the Germany I used to know back in the 70s when Willy Brandt was around and could stand up to the U.S. and say, no, we're going to have a decent relationship with Russia. And the benefits that accrued from that were substantial. Why this current crop of German officials are willing to sacrifice their own interests for U.S. interests, for NATO interests, so to speak, is really, it's not beyond me. It's part and parcel of how they've acted as infants and then as adolescents since 1945. They ought to grow up. They ought to be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
You're talking about the politicians in Europe, or you're talking about the politicians specifically in Germany?
Mostly in Germany. Germany is what counts, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the others take their cue from Germany. I lived there 5 years. I know the Germans. Some of my best friends are German, but they have this characteristic, of bending to pressure from the United States, and they can't get out of it. They have very, very neophyte, very adolescent, sophomoric people in charge, politicians, pure and simple. And they don't really respect what German national interests are. They see themselves as an attachment, as sort of an attachment to the United States and can't break out of that subordinate relationship. Just like Yeltsin, just like Zelensky, they're puppets, and they apparently enjoy being puppets because they think, up until now at least, that their future is in the West, and they're going to find that their future has gone downhill ever since they decided to sign on to this war in Ukraine.
And what do you make of Zelensky himself? Now, I know I have an affinity for him because he was a comedian who pretended he played the president in a TV show, and now he actually is president. And it made me feel good that comedians could become, real players on the world stage. But it makes me feel embarrassed that the one comedian that does is this corrupt guy who provoked a war. What is your feelings about Zelensky?
Well, Jimmy, he was a good comedian, and he's a terrific actor. Let's face it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but when he took office on the strength of a campaign to make better relationships with Russia, he got turned around. By whom? By those same people who are waving for a taxi there, the neo-Nazis who made very clear, look, we're not going to obey any order from you. We're going to keep shelling the people in Donetsk and Lugansk. Go away. You're not in charge. And then, of course, the Americans chipped in and said, the neo-Nazis are right about that. You're not in charge. We're in charge. And don't be thinking about making any deals like you tried to make in March and April. That's out of the question. We're going to use this to defeat Russia. You're just I don't say you're just a pawn, but That's the deal. You stay in office, that's what you got to do.
So there was a peace agreement that was able to be instituted back in March and April, and that's when Boris Johnson got on a plane, went there, and at the behest of NATO, and told them, "You better not do this, or you're probably going to end up dead." So he didn't do it. So is that why he doesn't? Is he his life is threatened not only by NATO, but also his life is threatened by the extreme right wing, the Azov Nazis that are in Ukraine? Correct?
That's right. Yeah. He has no options really, except to play this role. And he's playing it beautifully. I mean, he's Time Person of the Year, right?
Uh-huh.
But he's going to realize that this doesn't last. And he's going to realize that within the next few months, when those mobilized Russian troops, 300,000 in number, completely outweigh and outgun what the rest of the Ukrainian army is right now. And that's less than 200,000. They don't have the upper hand. You know, you don't have to be a military analyst, as an intelligence analyst, as I was when I was in the army back in the early 60s. I mean, look at the map, for God's sake. Look at the map. Look at the lines of communication and supply, okay? Russia's got it hands down. What is the U.S. going to do? Is the U.S. going to... So in other words, the U.S. wants to keep this thing going on the sort of benighted notion that they can weaken Russia. And they're not going to weaken Russia unless, of course, it comes to nuclear weapons. And that's off the table as far as the Russians are concerned. Why? Because they're principled? No, because they don't need. And, you know, this is a codicil. Putin never threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons. That is a propaganda ploy. He didn't say that. He doesn't mean that. All he wanted to do is remind people, hey, look, you know, we're going to use everything at our disposal, his words. And that, of course, includes the ultimate, the nuclear weapons. But he doesn't have to use them. And he must be very, very suspicious as to why the United States and other propaganda media keep accusing him of threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons.
So why would Germany and Europe be willing to, because all these sanctions we put on Russia is actually hurting us more, the West, right? Like we had high gas prices, we have high inflation in Europe. Their energy prices are they might not even have energy for the winter, right? They're worried about people dying from it. And there's big economic pain being inflicted there. So I don't get what is in it for them to go along with the United States. Is the United States what is the threat that they hold over Europe, right? Because and then if you could also tell us, because my guess is the real reason for this war is the big part of it is the United States wanted to sell more liquefied natural gas to Europe because Russia provided 40% of the Europe's energy, and we wanted part of that market. And so this was a way to do it. And so what's in it for Europe? So go ahead, take it from there.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy, I really regret you're asking me questions that I don't know the answer to.
Oh, okay.
For God's sake, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, these are politicians that kind of drifted up into power. They're subservient to what they call NATO, which is really the United States. They don't give a rat's patootie about their own people. And that's the only way I can explain it. 77 years after the end of the war, they're still obeying the United States until it becomes clear that this is a dead end. And that's going to come clear this winter, not only in Ukraine, but as Russia and China together, rally the rest of the world against the United States and make the rest of the world realize that this is the lily white West. Against people of color, Chinese, Indians, Russians, South Americans, Iranians. It's really become pretty nasty because, racism has never been far below the surface in our country. And now it's appearing, as it usually does, in foreign relations. Take William Westmoreland, our commander in Vietnam, for example. A year after the war, he was interviewed, and he says, the Oriental, they don't have the same attitude toward life. Life is cheap in the Orient. Now, where's he from?
Right.
He's from South Carolina. Who was the only advisor to Truman that told him to bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima? Billy Burns, Secretary of State. Where was he from? South Carolina. So the racism runs deep. And when you talk about U.S. exceptionalism or that it is indispensable, well, that's a big part of it because the naked little feet in the jungle of Vietnam, they're not going to win against the United States. Well, they did, okay? The people in Afghanistan, Iraq, they did, okay? When are we going to learn? Well, we're not going to learn until there's more than just two parties that have the same benefits from fostering and profiteering from war and from the military-industrial complex.
Оставте церкву, дайте, щоб мені відспівали мою дитину, яка знімаєте. Він його благословляв. Я вас прошу до суботи, дайте мені жити, дайте мені дитину відспівати, а? Я на колінах перед вами стою. Я прошу, уйдіть, дайте мені жити, дайте мені дитину відспівати. Ви мене вчора, ви не пустили в церкву до ікони, ви, ваші хлопці били мене. Я прошу, уйдіть, дайте мені Володю похоронити. Я прошу, дайте мені сюди в церкву зайти і похоронити мою дитину відспівати. Ідіть, я вас Богом прошу.
Ну, якщо ви зайдете сюди, вона не буде відспівати свою дитину.
Я не хочу, щоб ви навіть були присутні.
А що ви робите? А що ви робите? Що ви робите? Ви забираєте наш храм.
Я за всіх воїнів молюся.
Ви журналісти, ви говорите тільки правду по ЕТСН. Ви всю брехню виводите на наружу. Отож. Ви правди нічого не розказуєте. Як відбирають храми, отож, як священників б'ють, як дітей.
Наша вера правая, наша вера православная.
З якого ви храму? А з якого ви храму,
Я
скажіть?
із Лаври, я із Лаври.
Ви із Лаври. А чому сюди СБУ приїхали? Скажіть, будь ласка.
Я не знаю, я на службу ходжу. Приходьте на службу.
А руський мір тут є чи немає?
Пошукайте.
Погнались.
Не бійся!
сюда! Лоскоп, сука, блядь!
Ми українці! Ми не москалі! Ми не вбиваємо! Не чіпайте!